She told me to stop contacting her through a text message after 3 years together. I should have thanked her for the clarity instead of wasting 8 months trying to understand what went wrong. Looking back, the signs were everywhere, but I was too invested in what I thought we were building to see them clearly. I'm David, 31 years old, and I work as a pharmaceutical quality control specialist in Boston, making about $125,000 a year. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, meaningful, and pays well enough to live comfortably in one of America's most expensive cities. I've always been the practical type, the guy who reads the fine print, saves for emergencies, and actually enjoys creating spreadsheets to track our shared expenses. When I met Emma 3 years ago at a coffee shop near MIT, I thought I'd found someone who appreciated that stability. She was this vibrant freelance graphic designer with paint under her fingernails and big dreams about creating art that mattered. She talked about her work with such passion that I found myself genuinely excited about projects I didn't fully understand, and I loved how she could see beauty in things I'd never notice. For the first year and a half, we seemed to complement each other perfectly. I provided the financial foundation while she brought creativity and spontaneity into my structured world. I covered about 75% of our Boston apartment rent because her freelance income was inconsistent, and I didn't mind because I believed we were building something together. When she mentioned struggling with $12,000 in student loan debt, I paid it off without hesitation, telling her it was an investment in our future. When she wanted to start an online jewelry business selling handmade wire sculptures, I provided the initial capital and helped her set up the business structure, even though the venture ultimately failed after 6 months. I genuinely thought I was being supportive, helping someone I loved pursue their dreams while I handled the practical necessities. But somewhere around month 18, things started shifting in ways I initially dismissed as normal relationship evolution. Emma joined a new friend group centered around this woman named Vanessa, who seemed to specialize in promoting what she called elite partnerships and executive-level dating through her social media platforms. Suddenly, Emma was consuming content about high-value men and strategic relationship positioning, concepts that felt completely foreign to our reality. She started making comments about my work that stung in ways I couldn't quite articulate. When I'd mention a successful project or a process improvement I'd implemented, she'd nod politely but then change the subject to stories about Vanessa's boyfriend, who apparently made 6 figures a day trading cryptocurrency. My methodical approach to investments, my preference for index funds and long-term planning, became sources of mild embarrassment rather than the financial wisdom she used to admire. I watched her slowly transform from someone who appreciated my stability into someone who seemed almost ashamed of it. She started asking questions that felt loaded, like whether I'd ever considered a more dynamic career path or if I was satisfied with such a conventional lifestyle. The woman who used to curl up next to me while I explained compound interest began rolling her eyes when I mentioned maxing out our retirement contributions. Emma started going out more with Vanessa's circle, attending networking events and creative meetups that I was subtly discouraged from joining. When I'd ask about her evenings, she'd give vague answers about industry connections and potential opportunities, but I could sense her growing distance from our life together. She began treating our apartment like a temporary stopping point rather than the home we'd carefully chosen and furnished together. The freelance graphic design work that had once excited her became a source of frustration, and she started talking about bigger opportunities that required different kinds of connections. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid that my natural tendency toward planning and analysis would trigger another lecture about limiting thinking or risk-averse mindsets. The worst part was how she started framing our relationship dynamic as something holding her back rather than supporting her forward. My willingness to handle the bills became evidence of her dependence rather than our partnership. My practical nature, which had once been attractive, became a liability in her pursuit of what Vanessa's crowd considered a more elevated lifestyle. I kept trying to understand what had changed, what I could do differently, but every conversation seemed to reinforce her growing conviction that I represented everything she needed to outgrow rather than grow with. The final humiliation came at a rooftop networking event for Emma's creative industry contacts, where I learned exactly how little respect she had left for me. She'd invited me to what she described as an important professional gathering, and I'd actually looked forward to meeting the people whose opinions had become so influential in her life. I wore my best suit, prepared thoughtful questions about their work, and genuinely wanted to support Emma in her career development. The event was held at this trendy downtown venue with overpriced cocktails and a crowd that seemed more focused on taking Instagram photos than actual networking. Emma immediately gravitated toward Vanessa and her boyfriend Marcus, the cryptocurrency day trader who apparently represented everything I wasn't. Marcus was the type of guy who wore expensive watches he couldn't actually afford and talked constantly about his latest investment wins while conveniently omitting his losses. When Emma introduced me as her boyfriend who works in pharmaceuticals, Marcus launched into this condescending lecture about how traditional industries were dying and how anyone still working a regular job was missing the digital revolution. I tried to engage respectfully, mentioning some interesting developments in biotech investing, but he cut me off with a laugh and told the group that my approach was exactly the kind of outdated thinking that keeps people trapped in mediocrity. Emma stood right there and said nothing while this guy essentially called me a financial dinosaur in front of her entire social circle. The conversation got worse when Marcus started explaining his trading strategies, which were basically sophisticated gambling dressed up with technical analysis buzzwords. I couldn't help myself and politely mentioned that his approach had extremely high risk factors and that most day traders lose money over time, backing up my statement with actual statistical data I'd read in financial journals. Marcus rolled his eyes and told everyone that this was exactly what he meant about conventional thinking limiting potential returns. Emma actually agreed with him, saying that maybe some people are just more comfortable with safe, predictable outcomes rather than pursuing real wealth. She said it with this apologetic smile, like she was embarrassed by my lack of vision rather than proud of my financial knowledge. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized she was publicly distancing herself from my perspective to align with his. The evening continued with Marcus holding court about cryptocurrency trends while the rest of the group hung on his every word like he was some kind of financial guru instead of a guy who'd gotten lucky during a market bubble. Emma participated enthusiastically in conversations about scaling creative businesses and leveraging personal brands for maximum impact, using terminology she'd clearly absorbed from Vanessa's content. When someone asked about my work, Emma jumped in before I could answer, explaining that I was in a very stable field but that stability sometimes meant limited growth potential. She framed my career like it was a consolation prize rather than a profession that literally keeps people alive through drug safety oversight. I spent the rest of the event watching Emma perform this new version of herself, someone who apologized for my presence rather than valued it. On the drive home, she was quiet until we hit a red light, then she turned to me with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was looking at a problem she needed to solve. She told me that spending time with ambitious people made her realize how much she'd been limiting her own thinking by accepting conventional wisdom about relationships and career paths. When I asked what she meant specifically, she explained that Vanessa's group had helped her understand the difference between partners who elevate each other and partners who enable each other's comfort zones. According to Emma, I was definitely in the enabler category, providing security but not inspiration, stability but not growth. She said her friends had pointed out that she'd been explaining and defending our relationship dynamic instead of celebrating it, which was apparently a red flag she'd been ignoring. The worst part came when she told me that Marcus had privately asked her whether she was truly happy with someone so risk-averse, and that his question had made her realize she'd been settling for safety instead of pursuing her full potential. She delivered the final blow by explaining that her entire friend group saw me as her safety net rather than her genuine partner, and that she was tired of being the girl who chose security over ambition. Emma told me she needed space to grow into the person she was meant to become, and that meant surrounding herself with people who understood what she was trying to build rather than people who questioned every unconventional decision. She made it clear that my practical approach to life, my preference for proven strategies over trendy risks, represented everything she needed to move beyond if she wanted to create the kind of success Vanessa's circle had achieved. 3 days after that humiliating networking event, Emma ended our 3-year relationship through a text message while attending some weekend retreat with Vanessa's influencer friends. I was at home on a Sunday morning, making coffee and reviewing some work documents, when my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. The text was clinical and final, explaining that she'd done a lot of thinking during her retreat and realized she needed to make some major life changes to align with her true potential. She wrote that our relationship had become a comfort zone that was preventing her from pursuing the kind of connections and opportunities that could transform her career trajectory. Emma explained that she'd gotten clarity about what she wanted from life, and that meant surrounding herself exclusively with people who shared her vision for exponential growth rather than incremental progress. The message continued for several paragraphs, outlining how she planned to focus entirely on building her personal brand and expanding her network within Vanessa's entrepreneurial ecosystem. She thanked me for the financial support over the years but made it clear that she was ready to create her own success story without depending on anyone else's stability or conventional approach to building wealth. The final line hit like a physical blow, telling me to stop contacting her because she needed complete space to execute her new life strategy without any emotional ties to her previous limiting beliefs. I read that text message 3 times, feeling something shift inside me that wasn't devastation or heartbreak, but rather a strange sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Instead of falling apart or desperately calling her to fight for our relationship, I found myself analyzing the situation with the same methodical approach I used for quality control assessments at work. Emma had essentially fired me from the position of boyfriend via text message while hiding behind some personal development retreat instead of having an adult conversation about our future. The cowardice and disrespect in her approach told me everything I needed to know about who she'd become under Vanessa's influence. I spent the next hour going through our shared financial obligations with the precision of a forensic accountant, documenting every bill, lease agreement, and expense I'd covered during our time together. I pulled bank statements, utility records, and receipts for major purchases, creating a comprehensive spreadsheet that showed exactly how much I'd invested in our life together over the past 3 years. The numbers were staggering when laid out systematically, representing not just money but time and emotional energy I'd poured into supporting someone who just discarded me via text message. I calculated rental contributions, debt payments, business investments, and daily expenses, realizing I'd essentially been funding Emma's lifestyle while she developed the confidence to leave me for more exciting prospects. Rather than feeling sorry for myself or trying to process the emotional devastation, I approached this like any other business decision that required immediate strategic planning. Emma had made her choice crystal clear through both her words and her method of delivery, and I wasn't going to waste time trying to change her mind or understand her reasoning. I started making lists of practical next steps, beginning with our shared apartment lease and ending with complete separation of our digital and social connections. By noon, I'd outlined a comprehensive exit strategy that would remove me from every aspect of Emma's life with surgical precision, leaving her to face the full financial reality of the independence she claimed to want. I called my college roommate Troy, explained the situation in matter-of-fact terms, and asked if he could help me execute a move within the next few days while Emma was still at her retreat. Troy immediately understood the strategic advantage of acting quickly while she was away, and he started coordinating with 2 other friends who had trucks and flexible schedules. I spent Sunday evening categorizing every item in our apartment by ownership, taking photos of serial numbers and receipts for anything expensive I'd purchased. Emma's text message had been clear about wanting complete separation, and I intended to give her exactly what she'd asked for in the most thorough way possible. The woman who'd broken up with me via text while attending a personal branding retreat was about to learn what it actually cost to maintain the lifestyle she'd taken for granted while pursuing her elevated social circle. Emma extended her retreat by several additional days, posting Instagram stories about breakthrough moments and paradigm shifts while I executed the most thorough extraction plan of my life. Troy arrived Monday morning with a truck and 2 other friends who understood the assignment without needing detailed explanations about relationship drama. We worked with military precision, systematically removing every single item I'd purchased during our 3 years together. I'd prepared detailed lists the night before, organized by room and priority, ensuring we wouldn't miss anything or accidentally take something that belonged to Emma. We started with the big furniture pieces I'd bought when we moved in together. The sectional sofa I'd saved for months to afford, the dining table and chairs I'd assembled myself, and the bedroom set that had taken weeks to research and select. Every piece of electronics came next, From the smart TV and sound system to the laptop I'd let her use for her design work and the gaming console I'd barely touched since we started dating. The kitchen equipment disappeared item by item, including the espresso machine Emma used every morning but had never offered to help purchase, along with all the quality cookware and small appliances that had made our Sunday meal prep sessions possible. I'd installed a comprehensive smart home system over the past year, adding devices gradually to make our apartment more convenient and energy efficient, and I methodically removed every sensor, hub, and automated component until the place felt like a basic rental unit again. Troy found the whole operation fascinating from a logistics perspective, commenting on how much stuff accumulates when one person consistently pays for upgrades and improvements while the other person simply enjoys the benefits. My friends were actually impressed by the organization and documentation I'd prepared, treating the move like an interesting puzzle rather than an emotional crisis. By Tuesday afternoon, we'd loaded everything into storage units I'd rented across town, leaving Emma's personal belongings neatly organized but completely alone in what had suddenly become a very expensive empty apartment. I contacted the utility companies and terminated every service that was in my name, including internet, cable, electricity, and gas, ensuring the disconnections would take effect the day after Emma's scheduled return. The lease presented a more complex challenge, but I'd reviewed our rental agreement carefully and discovered I could break it by paying a penalty equal to 2 months' rent, which I calculated was still cheaper than continuing to subsidize Emma's housing while she pursued her new independent lifestyle. I wrote a check to cover the early termination fee and arranged for the property manager to handle the details with Emma directly, removing myself from any future housing obligations. My final act was printing out a screenshot of Emma's breakup text message, the one where she told me to stop contacting her, and taping it to the otherwise empty refrigerator with a simple handwritten note that said "message received and respected" followed by my signature. I wanted her to understand that I'd taken her instructions seriously and implemented them more thoroughly than she'd probably anticipated. Before leaving the apartment for the last time, I changed my phone number and blocked Emma on every social media platform, email account, and digital service we'd ever used to communicate. I activated new accounts with different usernames she wouldn't be able to guess, essentially disappearing from her digital world as completely as I'd disappeared from her physical space. Troy helped me move my immediate necessities into a furnished corporate apartment in Cambridge that I'd arranged through my company's relocation services, a temporary solution that would give me time to find permanent housing without rushing into another long-term commitment. The corporate apartment was actually an upgrade from our Boston place, with better security, included utilities, and a concierge service that handled deliveries and maintenance requests. I spent Wednesday evening unpacking my essential items and marveling at how much simpler life felt when every decision was mine alone to make, from what to watch on TV to how to organize the kitchen cabinets. Emma's retreat was supposed to end Thursday evening, which meant she'd return to discover her new reality within 24 hours. I felt no anticipation, anxiety, or curiosity about her reaction because I'd executed her request for complete separation with the thoroughness she should have expected from someone trained in quality control and systematic problem-solving. She'd wanted space to pursue her elevated lifestyle without any limiting influences from conventional thinking, and I'd provided exactly that by removing every trace of my conventional support system from her environment. Emma returned from her life-changing retreat Thursday evening to discover what complete independence actually looked like, and her reaction was exactly as predictable as I'd expected from someone who'd never faced real consequences for her choices. According to Troy, who maintained contact with some mutual acquaintances, she initially called the police thinking someone had robbed our apartment before finding my note taped to the empty refrigerator. The officers apparently explained that domestic disputes involving shared property weren't criminal matters unless actual theft had occurred, and since I'd only taken items I could prove I'd purchased, there was nothing they could do to help her recover what she'd lost. Emma spent her first night back sleeping on an air mattress she had to buy at midnight from a 24-hour store, using her phone's flashlight because the utilities I'd canceled wouldn't be restored until she established new accounts in her name. She discovered that setting up basic services required security deposits she hadn't anticipated, credit checks that revealed her financial dependency, and waiting periods that meant living without internet or reliable electricity for several days. The apartment she'd shared with me transformed overnight from a comfortable home into an expensive empty box that showcased exactly how much of our lifestyle had depended on my contributions rather than her creative vision. Unable to reach me through any normal channels since I'd blocked her everywhere and changed my number, Emma began creating fake email accounts with increasingly desperate subject lines trying to get my attention. The first messages were angry, threatening legal action for abandonment and claiming I'd violated some imaginary relationship contract by leaving without proper notice. She accused me of being vindictive and immature, arguing that adults should be able to end relationships without destroying each other's living situations or financial stability. Emma tried to frame my systematic extraction as emotional abuse, conveniently forgetting that she'd initiated our complete separation through a text message while avoiding any face-to-face conversation about our future. When the angry approach failed to generate any response, she shifted to manipulation tactics, sending long messages about how Vanessa's retreat had helped her realize she'd been influenced by toxic thinking patterns that didn't reflect her true feelings about our relationship. She claimed the breakup text had been written during an emotional breakthrough session that she now regretted, and that she needed to talk to me about rebuilding what we'd had together on a stronger foundation. Emma promised she'd learned valuable lessons about appreciating stability and partnership, using language that sounded like she'd been rehearsing apologies while calculating how much it would cost to replace everything I'd removed from her life. She started sending multi-page essays from different email addresses and phone numbers she'd borrowed from friends, detailing her newfound understanding of my worth and begging for a chance to prove she could be the grateful partner I deserved. The messages revealed how quickly her elevated social circle had disappeared once her financial situation became apparent, with Vanessa and Marcus suddenly too busy to offer practical support now that Emma couldn't afford to participate in their expensive networking events and lifestyle activities. Emma's tone became increasingly panicked as she realized that the people who'd encouraged her to leave me had no interest in helping her deal with the consequences of that decision, leaving her isolated in an apartment she couldn't afford with a lifestyle she couldn't maintain. She tried every emotional manipulation technique I'd seen her use successfully in the past, from guilt about the money I'd spent on her to promises about the future we could build together if I'd just give her another chance to prove herself. The messages came at all hours, sometimes coherent and strategic, other times rambling and desperate, but always focused on convincing me that her breakup decision had been a temporary mistake rather than a calculated choice to pursue better options. Emma even attempted to contact me through my work email, which I immediately reported to HR as harassment from a former romantic partner, creating a paper trail that would protect me if her behavior escalated further. She began reaching out to my friends and family members she could find on social media, trying to enlist them as intermediaries who might convince me to respond to her increasingly desperate attempts at communication. The woman who'd confidently told me to stop contacting her while pursuing her elevated lifestyle was now doing everything possible to re-establish contact, apparently discovering that independence was significantly more challenging than her influencer friends had advertised. Over the following 8 months, I threw myself into building the life Emma had convinced herself I was incapable of creating, proving that her assessment of my potential had been as wrong as everything else about her new worldview. My supervisor had been impressed by my systematic approach to the relationship extraction and my complete focus on work afterward, recommending me to lead a critical FDA compliance project that had been stalled for months due to previous management issues. I applied the same methodical precision I'd used to document our shared expenses toward creating comprehensive audit trails and process improvements that streamlined our entire quality assurance department. The project involved coordinating between multiple pharmaceutical manufacturers, federal regulators, and international compliance standards, requiring exactly the kind of detailed planning and risk assessment that Emma had dismissed as limiting conventional thinking. My work caught the attention of senior management when I identified potential compliance gaps that could have cost the company millions in fines and delays, leading to implementations that saved both time and money while exceeding FDA requirements. The successful completion of this project earned me a promotion to Senior Quality Assurance Director with a 30% salary increase and expanded responsibilities that included training other teams on systematic risk management approaches. I used my increased income to move into a luxury apartment in Back Bay with floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and amenities that made my old shared living situation look like a college dorm room. Emma's situation deteriorated in direct proportion to my professional advancement, unable to afford the Boston apartment alone and forced to move back with her parents in suburban Worcester after her landlord started eviction proceedings for unpaid rent. Vanessa and her entrepreneurial circle had quietly distanced themselves once Emma's financial provider disappeared, apparently discovering that their elevated networking events were less interesting when attended by someone who couldn't contribute to group dinners or weekend trips to expensive destinations. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emma had tried to maintain her lifestyle for a few months using credit cards, but eventually maxed out her limits and faced the reality that freelance graphic design work couldn't support the standard of living she'd grown accustomed to during our relationship. Her Instagram posts shifted from inspirational content about personal growth and ambitious networking to generic motivational quotes about overcoming challenges and trusting the process, with noticeably fewer photos featuring expensive meals or designer accessories. I started training for the Boston Marathon, something I'd always wanted to do but had never prioritized during the years I was focused on supporting Emma's various projects and maintaining our shared lifestyle obligations. The structured training schedule gave me clear goals and measurable progress markers, plus it connected me with other serious athletes who appreciated discipline and long-term commitment rather than quick fixes and shortcuts. Through my running group, I joined a professional hiking club that organized weekend trips throughout New England, where I met people from various industries who shared my appreciation for planning, preparation, and incremental achievement over time. These activities filled my social calendar with people who valued reliability and follow-through, creating a support network based on shared interests rather than financial dependencies or social media validation. Emma continued her attempts to reach me through work contacts, mutual acquaintances, and even fake LinkedIn profiles designed to look like potential professional connections, but I maintained complete radio silence while documenting every attempt for potential harassment complaints. Her parents apparently tried to convince her to get therapy and focus on rebuilding her career, but she remained fixated on the idea that reconciling with me was the solution to her financial and emotional problems rather than accepting responsibility for the choices that had led to her current situation. I heard she'd started working part-time at a local marketing agency in Worcester while living in her childhood bedroom, a dramatic downgrade from the independent creative lifestyle she'd envisioned when she decided I wasn't ambitious enough to support her elevated aspirations. Meanwhile, I was discovering that life without constant financial pressure and emotional manipulation was remarkably peaceful, allowing me to pursue interests and relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than rescued fantasies or guilt obligations. The final confrontation happened at a pharmaceutical industry awards dinner where I was receiving recognition for my FDA compliance project, and Emma appeared as a freelance event photographer working for the catering company that had been hired to document the evening. I was sitting at a table with colleagues and Claire, the brilliant biochemist I'd been dating for 3 months after meeting her through my hiking group, when I noticed a familiar figure moving between tables with professional camera equipment. Emma looked noticeably different from the confident woman who'd broken up with me via text message, wearing an ill-fitting black dress that suggested she was borrowing clothes for work assignments and moving with the careful efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes that might cost her the gig. She spotted me during the cocktail reception and spent the next hour positioning herself to take photos near our table, clearly hoping for an opportunity to approach without creating a scene that might jeopardize her employment. When I excused myself to visit the restroom during a break between award presentations, Emma followed and intercepted me in the hallway with the kind of desperate determination I recognized from her months of failed contact attempts. She looked exhausted and stressed in ways that had nothing to do with working an evening photography assignment, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that suggested she was running on coffee and anxiety rather than actual rest or nutrition. Emma immediately launched into a prepared speech about how she'd spent the past 8 months realizing what a terrible mistake she'd made and how seeing me receive professional recognition made her understand that she'd thrown away the best thing in her life for an illusion created by social media influencers. She begged for a private conversation where she could explain everything she'd learned about herself and apologize properly for the way she treated me during the relationship and especially during the breakup process. I listened politely while she detailed her new perspective on relationships, financial stability, and the importance of appreciating partners who provide genuine support rather than exciting drama, but her words felt like a job interview from someone desperate to be rehired rather than sincere emotional growth. When Emma finished her rehearsed apology, I calmly informed her that her continued attempts to contact me through various channels over the past 8 months constituted harassment and that I'd been documenting everything for potential legal action if the behavior didn't stop immediately. I explained that I had screenshots of fake email accounts, records of calls to my workplace, and witness statements from friends and family members she'd approached trying to reach me, creating a comprehensive paper trail that demonstrated a clear pattern of unwanted contact despite my obvious lack of response. Emma's face went pale as she realized that her months of desperate outreach had been building a legal case against her rather than softening my resolve or proving her commitment to reconciliation. She started to protest that she'd only been trying to fix her mistakes and rebuild our relationship, but I cut her off by explaining that adults who want to fix relationship mistakes don't spend months harassing their ex-partners through fake accounts and third-party intermediaries. When Emma broke down and begged me to remember what we'd had together and how good things could be if I'd just give her another chance to prove she'd changed, I introduced her to Claire, who'd approached to check if everything was okay during our extended absence from the awards ceremony. Claire was everything Emma wasn't: financially independent with her own successful career, intellectually curious about my work rather than threatened by it, and confident enough to support my ambitions rather than compete with them for attention. Emma's expression crumbled as she shook hands with Claire and realized that I hadn't been waiting around hoping for reconciliation but had instead moved forward with someone who actually appreciated the qualities she'd spent years undermining and dismissing. I ended the encounter by telling Emma that her breakup text telling me to stop contacting her had been the best advice she'd ever given me, and that I was finally following it completely by stopping all contact permanently, including this conversation, which would be our last interaction under any circumstances. As Claire and I walked back toward the awards ceremony, Emma called after us with one final desperate plea about how much she'd learned and grown, but I didn't turn around or acknowledge her words because I'd already heard everything she had to say through her actions rather than her promises. The woman who'd once dismissed my conventional approach to relationships and career success was now working as hired help at an event celebrating exactly the kind of achievements she'd told me I'd never accomplish, while I sat with someone who understood that building something meaningful takes time, commitment, and mutual respect rather than social media validation and networking strategies.